Welcome to the show, Debbie Reber.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time and your wisdom here. So, Debbie, I just read your bio. How do you introduce yourself?
On any given day, it's different, but I would say now that I'm the founder and the CEO of Tilt Parenting, and I'm also an author, a podcaster, a recovering teenager, and I am the parent of a 17-year-old neurodivergent kiddo. Those are kind of my big buckets.
Okay, awesome. What's TILT? What does that stand for?
It actually is not an acronym. Okay. So it is something that it's a word that really captured the essence of what I felt parenting a differently wired human was like, needing to tilt our perspective, tilt the way we see the world, experience the world, all those things.
I like that. Yeah. How many times have I tilted my head, right? When my kids are like, what are you doing? Yeah. So we're going to get into a pretty lengthy conversation, I think, about neurodiversity and neurotypical people, et cetera. And I'd love to start just a little bit of your story. How did you get into creating Tilt Parenting and also the conversation around neurodiversity?
Yeah, I always like to say that this was not part of my master plan in terms of my career. And I had a number of different careers before I did this. But right before I started Tilt, I had spent about maybe 10 years in the space of writing self-help books for teen girls. And I mentioned I was a recovering teen. So I'm someone who's always created resources that I wish I had had access to. And so I was really involved in that space. And then I got pregnant and I gave birth to not a teen girl. I gave birth to a little boy, baby. And in parenting Asher, just started to realize, this is actually not the way I thought my parenting journey was going to look. We started to get more information that Asher was more intense, was more precocious, had some sensory issues, was just kind of a more child. Mm-hmm. And as Asher got older, we got more information about some neurodivergence that was associated ADHD, giftedness, twice exceptionality, sensory issues. And it really threw my husband and I, Darren, for a loop and challenged us to resource information and just figure out a path. This was in the early aughts, I guess the mid aughts. And I was so frustrated with the lack of information and also feeling like there was so much stigma associated. And this was something I just had to, it was like hack. I use the metaphor of hacking like a path through thick forest with, a broom or something. Like it's so hard to figure out, what do I do? How do I access this? All of these pieces. And so I kind of always knew, even when I was in the midst of the really challenging years, that at a certain point, I was going to create what I wish I had had access to and create something for other parents like me. And that led to me eventually creating Tilt Parenting so that the 1 in 5, families, way more than that actually, but at least 1 in 5 families who are dealing with neurodivergence don't feel like they're outliers or like they drew the short straw or that there's something wrong with the way that their family is operating.
Yeah, so amazing. And in your book, Differently Wired, which I have here, you sort of talk about your journey of parenting Asher and the many frustrations that you guys encountered along the way. And I want to get into, about to get into that. I have just one question based on your intro there. Were you writing books for teenage girls because, I'm so curious what adolescence was like for you. Would you be willing to share something about that?
Yeah. Oh gosh. It took me so long to really understand who I was. I was someone who wasn't raised in an environment where I had a lot of confidence or more than that, even self-worth. I mean, I was an athlete. I was a runner. I was really good at that. I was super involved. Like on paper, I had it all together, but I was very insecure, felt limited, struggled with my own neurodivergence, which wasn't identified at the time. So felt like a goofball. I wasn't very settled or secure in who I was. And I feel like I lost a lot of time in my 20s, trying to forge a path for myself because I didn't have the confidence or the self-worth to really, move through my life the way I see young women today doing,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I really wanted to support other adolescent girls, young women, in feeling empowered and confident to really create the life that they wanted for themselves. Stuff it took me until I was maybe 30 to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so great. Yeah. I can relate to some of your story there. I felt kind of had it together on the outside, but on the inside, I felt very insecure and alone and kind of lost. So I can relate. Okay. And as you found, you started to make this journey, which shifted obviously all your priorities and your values, raising your son. Mm-hmm. You talk about, you really articulate it quite well in your book in terms of having a quote, different kid, mm-hmm. kid who doesn't fit into the norm, and how everything is sort of biased towards normal. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really interesting because these days it's like, what the hell is normal anyway, But you're right. There is this sort of invisible, weird yardstick that we're all measuring ourselves against as parents with our kids. Like, is this normal and is this not normal? And mm-hmm. so would you speak to just what that is like to, I guess, measure against quote normal and how that can be problematic?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, normal doesn't exist. You're absolutely right. And we know that certainly more now in this COVID era, because we have been able to observe people in a different way. Mm-hmm. But I think we start always measuring up, right? Our kids are always compared, whether it's growth charts or it's, what age you started to walk. Like, there is this idea that there is one way to kind of move through the world. And if you're not hitting certain milestones at a certain time, or your child's behavior feels bigger or inappropriate at a certain age, that there's something wrong. And we really see this show up in classrooms, right? There's expectations, even in preschool. I talk about in the book that, we expect 3-year-olds to sit crisscross applesauce and at circle time. And if they don't, that's the problem. They're bad kids. They're not compliant. They're trouble, whatever it is. Yeah. And so for a parent who has been pretty competent in career and at other things, to then go into parenting thinking, I'm going to rock this. I know what I'm doing. I've read all the right books, very consciously brought this kid into the world, feel really prepared, solid relationship, all the right tools. And then to have a child who isn't neatly fitting into the box and to start getting information like, there's a problem here. Your child mm-hmm. is doing this. This is happening. Phone calls from school, emails for early pick, whatever. A lot of feedback that as a parent is very confronting. Certainly my husband, Darren, and I felt like we were failing, that we were doing something wrong. Was this something that we had, a dynamic that we had created because of the way that we were parenting? Mm-hmm. And then it was really hard to then fit in to school communities, to neighborhood communities, to participate in life in a way that we wanted to as a family, because we felt these limitations because of big behavior or unmet expectations about the way our child was going to be in certain environments.
Yeah, and it seems like our school system, my opinion, it's pretty broken and outdated. Mm-hmm. And it seems so not equipped to really facilitate any child's learning, let alone someone who doesn't quote fit into the box,
Yeah. I would totally agree with that. I think there are kids who can do okay with the mm-hmm. current traditional educational model, but I don't think it's particularly meeting their needs very well. Those are just kids who happen to be able to comply enough or meet the goals, but it's just kind of biding time until they can start their real lives, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's define some terms here. Neurodiverse, is that the current adequate term to describe a kid? And if so, what diagnoses or what sort of other, I guess their diagnosis in a lot of settings, mm-hmm. labels fall under that umbrella category?
Yeah. So I will just say that the neurodiversity movement was really founded by the autistic community. And so initially the term neurodiverse specifically related to autism. Mm-hmm. And it has since expanded. Neurodivergent is kind of the word I think that most people use now, a neurodivergent human or child or person with neurodivergence. And so, yeah, that essentially means that the person has their brain is wired in with the natural variance, right? Where all brains are different. A neurodivergent brain is a brain that is wired in such a way that they may have something, they may be autistic, they may have ADHD, they may be gifted or profoundly gifted, they may have learning disabilities. Some aspect of the way that their brain is wired kind of knocks them outside of the neurotypical range because of one or more of these diagnoses.
And yeah, thanks. That's helpful. And ADHD and ADD now fall under that category as well, right?
And actually, I think ADD isn't really used much anymore. It tends to all be ADHD, which stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And some people have more of the some people it's combined type, so they have the hyperactivity and the inattentive piece. But that label, I think ADD on its own isn't really used much anymore.
Yeah, got it. And in your book, you talk a bit about ADHD. Now, there's so many books about this, and so I want to drill down into ADHD for a minute, and then I want to talk about sort of the Asperger's autism, maybe labels spectrum, and what the current stuff is, and then we can get into maybe parental solutions or ideas. In terms of ADHD, now, I don't remember reading in your book, I'm not all the way through it, about there's some doctors, some folks that believe that ADHD can also be not just nature, but nurture, meaning if a child has a traumatic event, a traumatic birth, a traumatic, first couple of years of life, that can contribute. Like Gabor Mate is an example, his book Scattered. So I'm curious what your take is on, is this ADHD nature, nurture? Does it matter? Like, where are you at with that?
A good question. I haven't thought about that a ton, actually, because I'm raising, a kid who has pretty severe ADHD. So for me, it was something that was pretty evident. And now both my husband and I realize that we are both undiagnosed ADHD. Okay. I will say that Ned Hollowell, who is one of the foremost, experts on ADHD, he recently, his most recent book is called ADHD 2.0. And he introduces a term of, and I don't remember the exact term, but it's an ADHD like traits. And certainly he felt it was really important to talk about that, because especially in what we as society have been through in the past couple of years with COVID, and people are really struggling more, I think, with their attention and their focus and being distracted. And so he really wanted to, he says it doesn't matter if it's specifically ADHD or, you can lump in this other, a lot of the ways that you would support yourself would work, whether or not you have that specific diagnosis or not. So I do think that ADHD is a very real diagnosis. I know, there have been articles that it doesn't really exist. Oh, we don't have ADHD in France, or, there was a viral article in Psychology Today about that very thing. ADHD is a very real thing. And I think that more people today would have ADHD traits because of, the tech that we're using, the tech that our kids are using, the pull of so many things on our attention. And so, I don't know if that answers your question. It's complicated.
It's complicated, right? I mean, so there's like, how do we deal with a kid who has a diagnosis or could have a diagnosis of ADHD, or who's getting sort of, have a child who the teacher's kind of like, hey, it's your kid again. And the kid's like not fitting into the sort of normal box and acting out or whatever, struggling, learning in that kind of environment, then gets a label of ADHD. I like to ask the question, well, okay, what created the ADHD in the first place, if anything, or what contributed to that? And certainly there's the parenting piece, and there's nature. There's maybe a genetic component. I have a friend who also has adult diagnosis here of ADHD, and his treatment with his doctor is about working on his vestibular system and his cross bilateral stimulation, and he's doing all these like balancing exercises, and that's really fascinating to me too.
Yes.
So I'm curious what you found. So we can nerd out on the like, how did this get created if we want, but I think it's also probably more interesting for people who, adults or children who have the diagnosis, what can we do? And what have you found in your journey with your own child or other kids that you work with and parents that really helps?
Yeah, it is very challenging, I will say. And I'm glad you mentioned the vestibular and balance exercises. That's something that Ned talks about a lot in his book. Even just like putting your shoes on while standing up and, challenging your brain to really focus. There is a lot of interesting research coming out that can really support someone in being more regulated and being able to focus more. I mean, I just want to also say ADHD, one of the things that's, I think, misunderstood about it is it's not just an attention issue. It's an emotional regulation challenge. It's an impulsivity challenge.
Yeah.
It's not being able to read social cues in the same way. It's having the way that you show up to social situations be off-putting to other people. And so a lot of people with ADHD have something called rejection sensitive dysphoria. And so it is a really complicated disability disorder that people struggle with. So I just want to kind of put that out there. And also with regards to medication, which can be a great solution for so many people, my understanding in the research that I've read is that there's about 30% of people for whom ADHD meds just simply don't work. And so it can be a great solution for some people, and for others, it's not an option. There's a lot of research about mindfulness as being a really important skill to build for people with ADHD. Certainly, Peter Shankman is someone, I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Shankman. He, I'll think of the name of his book, but he has ADHD, is a very successful businessman. He started, I think, Help a Reporter years ago. But he talks about the importance of learning really how to hack yourself. And I think that's important for all neurodivergent people, is to really understand, where do I get hung up? What are the tasks that challenge me? Usually it's executive function related tasks, time management, planning and organizing, following through, all of those things that like our brain helps us do to get by in life. And it's figuring out, okay, this is an area of challenge for me. Here's what I need to set myself up so that I can be successful in this. So it could be a lot of timers. It could be like multiple alarm systems on your phone or whatever, lots of reminders so that, you can kind of come back to present and check in and see what time is it, what's going on. Could be breaking complicated tasks into really small steps so it doesn't feel overwhelming. So there are a lot of different pieces for that. But I think the mindfulness piece is important, like starting to some sort of mindfulness practice. It's not easy to get teens to listen to Headspace or something, but it can be really beneficial. Exercise is so important. Huge. Moving your body to regulate. And there is a lot of research about how much more focused. And that was my thing. I now realize that, I'm still I exercise every single day, and it's just something I've always done. And that is part of how I've managed my own emotional regulation and ability to focus. So diet is really important. So sleep is super important. It's also super challenging for a lot of people with ADHD because turning the brain off is not always an easy task. So a bunch of there's.
How would you, Debbie, describe the difference or delineate between ADHD? Because everything you're saying starts to sound like could be someone that has a label of Aspergers. And I don't even, I've heard that term is sort of falling out of favor.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the key differences between Asperger's, autism, and then maybe while you're there, is Asperger's even used, and should we shy away from that term?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with that, actually. Asperger's as a term is falling out of favor primarily because the origin of the term is Hans Asperger, who was a scientist in Nazi-era Germany who was doing essentially experiments on kids with this specific profile that would also be considered quote unquote high functioning autism. Also, functioning labels are not appropriate. So
I was just going to say, I knew you'd have something to say about that.
Yeah. And so when Steve Silberman wrote a wonderful book called Neurotribes, he really dug into the research about the origins of Asperger's and Hans Asperger. And certainly in the last couple of years, well, the DSM, first of all, discontinued that as its own diagnosis, and it's just autism spectrum disorder.
Yeah.
There are many adults who had been given the label of Asperger's when they were younger who really identify with that and consider themselves Aspies, and that is important to them. And so within the autistic community of adults, I think there are some people who are really against using that term, and there are some who are like, sorry, that's how I identify. And so, but for kids coming up, they would get a diagnosis of ASD. People are still labeling level 1, level 2, which is another way of doing a functioning label. So that is something, again, that the autistic community is really not overwhelmingly not in favor of. Okay, so that answers the Asperger's question. Yeah. To talk about ADHD and autism, I mean, first of all, it's when we were going through this with my kid, when Asher was quite young, if you look at a chart that's like the traits of highly gifted people, the traits of autistic people, and the traits of ADHD, they are almost identical. Okay. And it's really confusing. And there's actually a book, I don't remember the exact title, about dual diagnoses and misdiagnoses of gifted people, because there's also the more gifted, which means I'm talking about an IQ, but the further away they are on the edge of that bell curve, the more likely it is that they are going to have some of these other characteristics or traits that they may look like ADHD, or they may look like autism, and they might be. You could have all three, right? So it's pretty challenging. I would say the thing, and I'm not an expert, I just want to say I'm not autistic and I'm not an expert in autism, but the biggest difference is from the research and from what I do know about autism is really known as a social, one of the biggest challenges is that social piece, that and a sensory piece. Those are two kind of key pieces. So autistic people almost always have sensory processing challenges. And that could be tactile things. It could be struggling with too much sensory input and their body really kind of shutting down, right? The kids who are wearing the headphones or in crowds or whatever. And then that social piece and sometimes struggling to read social cues and having that disconnect. That's pretty common with people with autism. Can be a challenge for people with ADHD, but it's a little different in the way that it presents. Yeah. Also, autistic people often will stim in some way, and that's not something that you'd normally see with someone with ADHD. And stimming could be some kind of repetitive physical movement, something that is a way of releasing stress and kind of processing things. So you might see someone flapping their hands, or they may have just a repetitive movement that they do. Yeah. So those are some of the differences.
Hey there, do you want to become a much better communicator? Do you want to build a secure relationship? And do you want to accept yourself more? If you want those three things, come join our Relationship Mastery course. This course is unreal, okay? 9-month journey, deep dive into you, how relationships work, and how to do them well. Check it out from one of our past graduates, Casey.
As an entrepreneur, I face a lot of my time looking at myself and what I'm doing and how to improve my business. And I was feeling like I was hitting walls personally and professionally. And those walls weren't like skills, like business skills. They were like interpersonal issues. They were the things that were keeping me up at night. It was the frustration that I felt. It was sweating. It was the tension. And it was like not knowing this stuff. So I enrolled in Deeper 9 months ago and just kind of had my life dramatically shifted. I got in touch with myself in a way that I've never been in touch with myself before. My whole life I've been striving and working and building and growing, but all of those things felt like exterior and none of it felt interior. Deeper broke that shell open, and it feels like I'm like peeling apart this armor that I've built to get an understanding of who I am, understanding that these emotions I felt were anxiety, and I could find where that anxiety lives in my body and what to do with it and how to see the triggers in my life that cause it and create space between those triggering events and the actual emotion. Jason talks about this core human split between who I am and who I act as in order to get love and care and attachment. And it's about closing that gap. And through Deeper, I learned skills and tools to apply to that part of me, tools that help my marriage. Our arguments are short-lived. We resolve them quickly. To say it's been life-changing feels trite, but I don't know how else to describe this and how powerful it is. I'm just feeling more secure in who I am and what I'm doing, and how that reflects in business is that I'm establishing better boundaries to support myself. I'm not feeling as emotional around the ups and downs of business, which has been huge for my well-being. It's just like touching to be around people that care, that want to be part of the conversation and support me and push me along. You can't change your life in 2 days. When I started going to the gym, it's not like I got fit in a weekend. 9 months is a pretty solid course. I don't know anyone else. And I've looked, right? I've gone through live events and audio programs and read books and attended conferences, and no one has this education that Jason has. Jason offers a step-by-step approach that helped me see who I am and how I show up and why I show up that way, and give me the choice to change my behaviors based on changing my values, change my relationship by creating new agreements, and have the relationship that I want.
All right, Casey and Adelaide, his wife, now they have a baby. Their marriage is doing awesome because they really applied themselves in this course. Go to relationshipschool.com/relationship mastery if you want in on the action. A few questions here. When I went to graduate school to study psychology, I don't remember one comment about autism, but I remember several about ADHD, and then I did my internship as a family therapist at a mental health center. And, it was in the time where ADHD was becoming a thing, and it people were throwing that label around a lot, but it was so interesting that no one was putting an autism label on anyone. What was happening? Like, when did this become like all of a sudden like, oh, this is maybe more common than ADHD, or this is everywhere? And I somewhere along the way, I got lost and wasn't tracking that.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say in the past 20 years, the number, the rate of autistic kids has just increased, incrementally. And I feel like it has been more in the last 20, 30 years, probably even 20 years where that has happened. I think it's because we just understand it better. Mm-hmm. And especially like even with girls, like girls are same with ADHD. They are not diagnosed at the same rate, even though every expert you'll talk to will say that the same percentage of girls is autistic or has ADHD as with boys. But because so many of the diagnostic models or the people, were created by men, and we're looking specifically at boys, those it looks different. And so there's a lot of girls who aren't being, seen as having those diagnoses, which is a whole other conversation. But so I do think that these kids have always been there. It's just, and there's so many adults who are discovering their neurodivergence now. Yeah,
which is cool.
It is really cool. Yeah.
I have a friend who just discovered it, and it's like changing his life because he's like, oh my God, everything's clicking into place about what I've been through in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's cool. And I hear from so many parents who are adults who have to really mourn the kid, the experience that they had as a child, where they weren't seen or supported in the way that they wish they had been, and how different their life may have been had they had those resources.
Yeah, completely. Well, man, I have so many questions. Let's go back to level 1 and level 2 and high functioning, low functioning, or whatever functioning, and why those terms are also falling out of favor. Because I'm over here thinking, well, aren't there certain contexts where, just to play devil's advocate for a minute, where those kind of labels are okay in life on someone like, okay, I have a person who's high functioning. Now, again, high functioning compared to what, right? What's the norm? What's the baseline you're comparing it to? But I have found those terms of high functioning, low functioning, and I could be labeling anything like a restaurant server to a boss to a husband to a parent or whatever. So help me there.
Yeah. No, I understand that. And I do want to say that I don't, again, just because I'm not autistic, I don't know if I would explain this as eloquently as an autistic person would, but from, the autistic ally groups that I'm in, and as an holistic person who surrounds herself with autistic people, I think the functioning labels don't really reflect the actual autistic experience. The functioning labels tend to reflect how well that person can mask or look normal according to society standards. It doesn't actually explain the lived experience and how hard that person might be working, or what else is really difficult for them. So it's based on an outsider perspective. And there's also this idea that if someone is non-speaking, as opposed to someone who is a speaking autistic person, that they are less than intelligent. That's not true. And so when we're assigning these functioning labels, we're basically saying, well, you're a low functioning person because of this, this, and this. And it's not accurate and it's harmful, right?
Yeah. Well, it's almost like gifted. It's to me, it's similar. Are we still using that label, gifted?
We are, yeah.
When I was in third grade, I got a chance. I was supposedly a pretty good reader, according to my teacher. And so I tried out for the gifted group and I didn't make it. And it was crushing because I watched 3 of my friends go into the gifted reading group and I didn't make it.
Yeah.
So and that was actually a pretty big wound for me that lasted for a while. That it's like even that has a potential downside, right?
Yeah, there's actually my friend Mark Smolowitz is doing a documentary called The G Word, and he talks about the stigma associated with the word gifted. And I was just speaking at a conference for families of profoundly gifted kids, and so this is something I think a lot about. So I will just say that there are different ways to measure giftedness, right? So a friend of mine, Scott Barry Kaufman, he is brilliant. He's a PhD. His podcast is the Psychology Podcast. Yeah. He's written a number of books. And one of his books is called Ungifted. He was in the special ed classes and had to fight his way in high school just to be in classes with the typical learners. Went on to get a PhD, went to Yale, like brilliant human, but he didn't, because of the way that giftedness is measured traditionally is an IQ test. He didn't perform well on that because of learning disabilities that he has, right? So he's twice exceptional. That's what twice exceptional means, gifted with a learning disability. Right. So it's not a fully accurate measure. And there are people who on a traditional IQ test, if you think about the bell curve, right? You've seen that bell curve, right? There are people who really are intellectually impaired or have cognitive, impairments. And so they on the bell curve would be really at this end, and they need a lot of support to learn to read or to do things. And they may never achieve a certain level of competence in those areas. Then you've got the curve where most people are, and then you've got the other end. And the people at the far end of the IQ on the other side, they're outliers as much as the people with the cognitive impairments, and they have very distinct needs and that deserve to be met too. And so when we don't look at giftedness, or we kind of reject that label, we're saying that your learning differences and the way that you could best be supported don't count as much. So I just want to kind of throw that out there, but it's a super divisive word.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That helps a lot. Okay, I want to come back to a couple pieces there. Masking. This is really important. And I'm so excited that I get to ask you this, because masking is a whole thing in the neurodivergent community where, and let me see if I can explain it, and then you can correct me or add, which is neurodivergent people feel like they don't fit in because of how they act, whether it's the social cues thing or their attention or their learning disability. And so or their giftedness. And so they try to conform, right? Because belonging is such a high need for human beings. they try to conform and they put on a mask to hide some of that stuff to fit in. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm. You got it. Yes.
Okay. Now here's what's interesting about this. I think every human is doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did that growing up. I wore a huge mask just to belong. And so many people that I work with here at the relationship school, like the whole journey is about unmasking ourselves and being authentic in a relationship, because so many of us created strategies as kids to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying, I don't want to say that to minimize someone's experience, but I want to say, to me, it's a human thing. And then it gets probably heightened based on other factors like neurodivergence. So I'm curious what you would say about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting perspective. And I would agree. I think we all adapt to have our needs met, right? We all do the things we need to do to feel seen or to be accepted. And so I would agree with that. The term masking really, in the way that you mentioned it initially, and we were talking about this before we started recording, Dr. Devin Price wrote a great book called Unmasking. Masking tends to be, in that context, tends to really be associated specifically with autism. And it's considered just so harmful because people really are just not living. They feel that unless they mask, they don't really have a shot at getting a job, at, finding a relationship, being accepted in any way. So I think it is much more extreme, but I would totally agree with you that that is what we all do, because we all want to be accepted for who we are, or be included and be seen.
Yeah. Like boys, for example, are masking their feelings to fit in, right? Because still, even in this culture where it's more okay to be emotionally literate and have emotions and cry, it's still like, by and large, like there's a lot of male to male sort of oppression there around, like, no, it's not okay to feel, you're going to get your ass kicked, you're going to get made fun of, you're going to get called a girl, whatever, all these, or misogynistic or homophobic comments made. So I think just my take here is we're all struggling with that. And I think there is something, like with a person that's gay or neurodivergent is struggling with it at another level that I personally am not, right?
Yeah. Or gender nonconforming. Yeah. I think anytime you're externally not showing up the way people expect you to, the stakes feel higher, and they often are. And so the masking doesn't feel as much of a choice.
Right. This is why that normal word is such a problem, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate everything you had to say about that. You had a lot to say about that in the book, but yeah, because it's just like so not fair. It's like, look, let's let people be who they are. That's when we're free to express ourselves and be ourselves. And there's a cost in a lot of settings to being yourself.
Yes.
You get kicked out of school, you get made fun of, you get beat up, you get rejected. Like stakes are pretty high in some areas. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So with autism now, being that maybe it's more ubiquitous than we thought, and it's like, wow, we all know someone, or we might, as adults listening to this, we might, if we took a formal test, we might identify as neurodivergent. How does one find out? Like, what are the best ways that adults and parents of kids who are like, their parents are questioning, what are some of the more effective ways so that we're not mislabeling people?
Yeah, I mean, there is a test. It's called the ADOS test, and it's kind of considered, I'm using air quotes, the gold standard of identifying autistic people. And basically, it's a series of questionnaires. It's some time spent with an evaluator in which I don't remember all the exact traits, but they're basically evaluating a child over these certain traits. And if you have X number of those traits within these 11 or whatever, then you're considered to be autistic. And there are social traits and there are stimming traits and so they're kind of a range. It's very subjective, right? So often it's an evaluator just making a call and saying, this, I could have gone either way on this, but there were enough of this that I felt confident making this diagnosis. So that is kind of what most people go through. A lot of people want that diagnosis for their kids because it will open up the door to insurance, to certain supports in school that wouldn't be available if they didn't have that diagnosis. And some evaluators are assessing kids with that specifically in mind, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a complicated process. And then because, talking about twice exceptional, because there can be so many traits that are overlapping, it can be really hard to tease out what's what, or what is ADHD, what is, what's going on. So if you have a really complicated kid, getting someone who really will take the time to maybe within an evaluation process, administer additional tests or, try other things to really tease out what's going on. I think having that accurate diagnosis is important. For adults, there are a lot of, just online, like you can fill out a questionnaire, you can do a self-assessment. And I would say most adults are self-identifying rather than going through, some do go through a formal process, but you could certainly Google, am I autistic? And you'll find, a lot of resources where you can just take a questionnaire and it will, depending on how you respond, it will say you're probably autistic or you'll have a sense. Yeah.
That's cool. Before we wrap up, I've got a few more questions. I want to come back to the social piece for the persons, particularly the person that's on the autism spectrum. I've had a number of students over the years come through our courses and then a number of clients over the years. And their biggest complaint, and they self-identify as either, usually Aspergers. I don't think I've formally had someone who said, I'm autistic. But now the way I'm understanding this, I'm going to use the word autism. They self-identify, and their biggest struggle is attunement to their partner. So it's reading faces and empathy. That's been their partner's biggest complaint. Their neurotypical partner has a complaint of saying, you don't get me, because they're judging their autistic partner as not feeling, not empathizing, not kind of tuning into what's going on with me and my pain over here, that you triggered me and now I'm upset. And I'm curious to get your thought on that. That's just been my experience. And they like this group of people, I'm kind of lumping them into a group over the years of just people I've had experience with, like, I think the tools, practical nature of tools and steps to how to empathize with someone, like, hey, do this, then that, then that. It's sort of almost like a, frontal lobe sort of step-by-step process, as opposed to like a feeling process, like feeling into my wife's pain because she's hurting or something. So I'm curious just to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say first and foremost, I think that idea that autistic people aren't empathetic is not true. I think that it's not expressed in the same way. There's a research study that I included in Differently Wired. I don't remember the reference, but there's almost an abundance of empathy, but it shows up differently, and it may not be expressed in the way that a neurotypical person would express it. So I just want to put that out there. Right. And then I'm also going to just share a resource. This woman named Kate McNulty, she wrote a book called Love and Aspergers. And she counsels, or she's a marriage couples counselor specifically for what she calls mixed neurotype couples, usually where one is autistic and one is not. And so anyway, her book is a great resource. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this, it's learning, it's understanding, it's having good communication. It's understanding when I'm acting this way or when I'm crying, I would love a hug, or I would love, and so we might have to, if you're partnered with someone who's autistic and their instinct isn't to see someone cry and be like, oh, I should hug, that's a conversation of starting to, explicitly sharing with your partner, when asking for what you need, or when this happens, this is how I'd like you to respond. And so, there are certainly we can learn how to do these things if it's not natural instinct. There's the show Love on the Spectrum, which has been controversial for lots of reasons, but there were 2 seasons in Australia, and the US version just launched a few months ago. And Jennifer Cook, who's an autistic activist, autistic woman, was kind of the relationship expert. I haven't watched it, but that's part of what she does is help couples understand how to communicate with each other, how to navigate emotional situations in a way that helps, the person feel seen and have their needs met.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so let me get one more take from you on this. I remember a couple many years ago where the wife was so frustrated with her husband, who had a formal diagnosis of Asperger's at the time, had been married 20-something years, but was so frustrated with his inability to empathize or get her feeling world. And I just, looking back and kind of hearing you talk right now, I'm wondering, did she just have an unrealistic expectation of him that she wanted to listen, to have him feel her a certain way, when maybe she could have been more adaptable and considerate of his diagnosis, and instead of expecting him to do it like her, she could have accommodated, I guess. That's sort of how I'm thinking about it right now.
I think that is a good metaphor for everything in society. We're always expecting neurodivergent people or autistic people to like fit into our environment, whereas we can create environments that are more supportive for neurodivergent people. So I think if you're in a relationship with someone, it's working together. It's meeting that person halfway. Amy Schumer has been pretty public about the fact that she married an autistic man and how much she appreciates the gifts that come with autism. And there are so many. I'm going to name one other person that it would be a great resource. David Finch, he wrote a book called The Journal of Best Practices. And he discovered his autism once he was married and had 2 kids, and things were not going well on the parenting relationship front. He couldn't quite get it right. And he realized, he learned he was autistic, and really kind of in a humorous way, it's a memoir, it's a great read, kind of explored and shared his journey of learning how to be a better partner and how to kind of navigate understanding his own autism within this relationship and what that looked like.
That sounds great. Okay. I'll check that out, and we'll put that link in the show notes too. Wow, amazing. Thanks, Debbie. This has been great. A couple more quick questions. As we wind down here, we ask all of our guests, one of our missions is to help young people get relationally educated. So if I had a room of, let's say, 1,000 high schoolers, and I could only teach them one thing or share with them one thing about love and relationships, and you were whispering in my ear, what would you want me to tell them?
I would want them to respect themselves. To remember, to respect themselves, to never put someone else's, especially as a teen, what somebody else wants or thinks you should be, or the way you should be in a relationship, to prioritize your own respect. Yeah.
Yeah. Hell yeah to that. And where is the best place people can find you and your book and all the resources you have for parents and everyone?
Yeah, thank you. Tiltparenting.com is the home for everything. So my podcast is there. You can read that first chapter of Differently Wired, can download that. And that is really where I share my story of the whole journey. And lots of resources on there. So it's the best place.
Great. Final words for parents of neurodivergent humans.
You did not choose the short straw. You won. You won the lottery. I'm just going to say neurodivergent humans, nonconformists, creative disruptors are awesome. And they are I think they're the key to solving the big problems of the future. And so if you feel like you're getting kind of caught up in fix it mode, I would just say put a pause on that. Your kid is not broken. Focus on the strengths and the individual that you're raising, and really kind of supporting them through that strengths-based lens, and hold on for the ride.
Amazing. Cool. Thank you, Debbie.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for listening. Action step. Well, I think it's important that you recognize whether you are neurodivergent or not, whether you know someone or not, you probably have worn a mask in your life and probably still are wearing a mask in certain settings. Your work is to make room for yourself, right? And the cost, I think, is pretty high for a neurodivergent person to constantly fit into, quote, what's normal here. I just feel so strongly about it's such a bummer that any of us have to fit into a box of what's normal. I just want us to be our beautiful selves, Yeah, so an action step could be talk to someone in your life who has a neurodivergent diagnosis, or if they self-identify, and remember, if you're not like me, you could say I am, because I think I have ADHD and have had my whole life, but I don't identify as neurodivergent necessarily. But if you just have a conversation with someone and just try to understand what it's like to be them. And if you're a parent of a potentially a neurodivergent kid, I think it's worthwhile to try to take an exam or do a test or get some professional help that would help you get a formal, I don't like labels and diagnoses necessarily, but sometimes they can really set some of us free. I think it could be worthwhile to give yourself an exam of some kind and look into resources that can better serve you and support you or your family member or friend or child, right? Yeah, and definitely check out the links in the show notes. There was a lot of them. From Ned Hallwell's book, Devin Price or Pierce's book, Steve Silverman. There was a lot. Scott Barry Hoffman, yada, yada, yada. So, a lot in there. Anyway, thanks again for listening. And I just want to thank you for your reviews on Apple Podcasts. Here's one from Z Mister. Hooked. I was introduced to Jason's work a couple years ago, recognizing my lack of skills. I was interested in his approach to relationships. I dove in and just completed my training to be a coach. This stuff helps with all your relationships, and most importantly, the relationship to yourself. Keep on growing. The world needs more caring and loving. Jason and Ellen's work is a big part of the solution for a healthy planet. Yes. Thanks for that review, Z Mister. And help us climb the ranks on Apple Podcasts. If you leave us a review, that would be awesome, especially if you haven't ever done that and you've received value here for free. That's all I ask. One more ask. I asked 2 asks. A review there and or a review for my book. If you have completed it and it's served you in some way, getting to 0, please leave a review on Amazon. Thanks, and be well. Hey guys, quick interruption from yours truly about our coaching program. If you've ever thought of being a coach, now is your chance. I think it's a really good time to become a relationship coach. Specifically, help other people with their relationships, work on your own as you train. It's phenomenal. We've certified now over 50 coaches here at the Relationship School. And our program has changed quite a bit, which we'll be doing a podcast on soon. In the meantime, though, I just want you to hear from one of our students who is now a certified level 1 individual relationship coach and a certified level 1 couples coach. His name's Bryce from Salt Lake City, Utah. Bryce says, my name's Bryce. I was already a coach, but realized I wanted to move into relationships and realized I knew nothing about them. I would say my practice has changed 100% since the training. With the Relationship School, it's like really getting in there with someone and being me in the session and sharing how they're showing up with me and inviting them to do the same. I'm here to be more present with myself and to help you do that. Then whatever action comes out of that is great, but more important is the relationship. So it's just like the target has completely moved. Bryce is an awesome coach, and he continues to train and develop himself. So more details coming soon about our relationship coach training. But if you want to go check it out, go to relationshipschool.com/RCT, Relationship Coach Training. And that will give you a lot of information, and you can apply, all right? Costs nothing to apply. As you know, I've dedicated my life to helping people with their relationships, right? I want to solve this problem so that all of you can work through your differences and have fulfilling, amazing, badass partnerships and relationships, family, coworkers, friends, whoever. And I have trained a ton of relationship coaches, almost 100 certified relationship coaches, to help you specifically work through your relationship challenges. So I want to invite you to a special deal we're offering to the podcast listener, where you can get 50% off your first month of coaching with one of our amazing relationship coaches. Okay, if you're tired of therapy, it feels like that's going around in a circle, or you want to actually set goals and accomplish your relationship goals, hire a relationship coach. Okay, go to relationshipschool.com/ Get Coaching Now, and then use the coupon code FIRST50 to get the 50% deal off your first month of relationship coaching. Super psyched to have our amazing coaches serve you and help you get to the next level. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships, and you are one of them, so thank you.